Percy Shelley saw poetry and art very much as a vehicle for participation in the world as opposed to an escape or refuge from it. Again and again, he uses poetry and his work in particular as a means to voice outrage at oppression, to take sides in political arguments, to be actively engaged in the worldly affairs that Wordsworth and his ilk were more likely to shun. A lot of Shelley gets clouded over. A lot of his work gets clouded over by his biography, by his personality. He was very tabloid ready in his day, notorious for his love life. He very famously left his first wife to run off with the teenage daughter of one of England's most notable intellectual and cultural couples, Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. Their 17-year-old daughter, Mary, ran off with him, even though there was a significant age difference, and they went on to become one of the great celebrity power couples of the day. Mary went on to write Frankenstein, of course, as Mary Shelley, and Percy was running off into getting involved in political disputes and uprisings and revolts and revolutions. And of course, he very dutifully went off and died very young, drowning off the coast of Italy. A lot of that gets whipped up whenever you're considering Shelley, to the detriment of his poetry. And he was a very skillful poet. The stridency of his beliefs tend to overshadow the poetry sometimes. I personally feel that he was a little too facile with his poetic gifts, and so he just let the enthusiasm, which is very romantic, the enthusiasm of his political sentiments carry him away on these grand denunciatory riffs, leaving poetic considerations and true art behind. So once again, the poetry just became almost an afterthought to the political sentiment behind it. But put all of that aside, he is a very gifted poet. He's got some real chops. He did use that explicitly for political ends in some very key poems. He wrote an awful lot. He was very prolific. Looking at specifically the political work that he had, you can get a real sense of who he was and what he could do. Among his most notable is the sonnet "England in 1819," where he reflects on the so-called Peterloo massacre, where there was a popular uprising, there was a demonstration of sorts, and the king's soldiers came in and very violently stomped it down. And he, in high dudgeon, came to the defense of the underdog and denounced the heavy-handed foot of government. Heavy-handed foot? I don't know. The heavy hand of government in this for oppressing the defenseless and the righteous. And he's really quite cutting in this. And he has this gift of language that when he wants to, it can really slice and dice anybody that gets in his way. He doesn't pull punches. An old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king. One of the best opening lines in the history of English letters. An old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king. Princes, the dregs of their dull race, who flow through public scorn, mud from a muddy spring. Rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling, till they drop, blind in blood without a blow. A people starved and stabbed in the untilled field, an army whose liberticide and prey makes us a two-edged sword to all who wield. Golden and sanguine laws which tempt and slay, religion Christless, godless, a book sealed. A senate, time's worst statute, unrepealed, are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illuminate our tempestuous day. Oh, he's quite strident here. He's quite passionate. It's political commentary, but it is very he's couching it in terms of poetry that is quite vibrant. It just pulses. You can feel the anger and the outrage coming out of it. And if you put aside all of the politics of that, it works quite well as poetry. It is inspiring. It reaches to something quite primal in us that, yes, the outrage, the political passion of it. It is a very romantic view of that. It picks on all the usual enemies of power and authority, which is a callback almost to Blake with his the blood coming down the palace walls. He's attacking the king himself, the princes, the entire royal establishment he sees as corrupt. The church. He blasts religion, Christless and godless, meaning that the civilization, the culture of the church has somehow lost its way, that it is a hollow authority at this point. It is no longer affiliated with Christ and God. It is it's simply a corrupt shell. And he just thunders against this with a kind of religious, spiritualist anger that is quite sweeping, and it appeals to it because it is such good oratory, such thunderous, applause-seeking, condemnation. It's appealing. It stirs rebellious emotions in the reader. It can be quite sweeping. I would imagine he would make a great political speechwriter for a out of mainstream candidate, perhaps. But that he's appealing to something, the outrage of appealing to standing up for the little guy, standing up against the authorities, that sense of that you readers out there know that this is wrong, that what they did is wrong, that standing up for your fellow workers, standing up for your fellow man, standing up with the weak against the powerful, we all understand that, and I'm going to appeal to you on that grounds, and I'm going to sweep you along with this very passionate and heated rhetoric. It's not an appeal to the logic of it. It's not an appeal to the legalism of it, the legalism of force. It's not an essay. It is making a direct and passionate appeal to the passions of the general populace. He's not speaking to the educated elite here. He's attacking the king and the church, and that is the educated elite. He is speaking to the common man here and trying to appeal to them in emotional terms. This is very much Shelley romanticism. And you can see in this, as he's coming at it from a very direct and emotional perspective, that is not necessarily legalistic, that is not necessarily creating a cogent and logical case. He is positing the poetry's place in that public sphere through different means. He gets into this more explicitly in his essay of sorts, which is again really just a long prose poem. Again, just as passionate and inspired and inspiring on those same emotional grounds. The defense of poetry, where he ends very famously, with the declaration that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, which is a bizarre construction that, poetry, which is art, is somehow a legislator, which is very prosaic. And, if you've ever read legislation, any laws, they're very, technical and precise, and try to have as little wiggle room of interpretation as possible. Well, the good laws that way. But here, he is saying, no, we have this role to play. We are legislators. We can affect things. And it's by some perspectives, troubling assertion of poetic authority, but it is also inspiring that, well, okay, it's not just for the members of parliament. It's not just for lawmakers, not just for kings and administrators and bureaucrats. The passionate articulation of humanity that poetry represents has a place in that as well. And that's a very significant argument that he makes for his poetry. Another great poem that he does is he titles A Song, Men of England, which is standing up for it's aspiring, again, taking the side of workers' rights within a conflict, standing up for the oppressed, voicing support for the downtrodden, all of these things that Shelley is doing from the comfort of being a fairly wealthy upper middle class guy. He comes from privilege. He was cast out because of a lot of his activities, a lot of his behavior, the whole leaving your wife thing. He was kind of an outcast from that point on, but it's still, you have to acknowledge he is very consciously and deliberately the upper crust guy who is slumming it a little bit. That criticism is fair. That's there. But anyway, this is an interesting poem that gives you a sense of, again, the poetic stance that he prefers. Men of England, wherefore plough for the lords who lay ye low? Wherefore weave with toil and care the rich robes your tyrants wear? Pretty obvious who the good guys and the bad guys are. Again, very short, simple lines here that he's appealing almost in a Blakean fashion to something. Well, it is a song. It's supposed to be an appeal on emotional grounds that has very short lines, and you're not supposed to think about them too much. They're short, tight lines with simple rhymes. And, clear characters. Men of England. Common men. Again, just men, no women. Okay, give them that. But, why plow for the lords who lay you low? Okay, it's clearly he's trying to stir up some very significant class warfare, you could say. For the lords who lay you low. Wherefore means why, just everybody knows that from reading Shakespeare in high school. Wherefore feed and clothe and save from the cradle to the grave those ungrateful drones who would drain your sweat, nay, drink your blood. Pretty obvious. Wherefore bees of England, bees, almost Virgilian here, workers. Bees of England, forge many a weapon, chain, and scourge, that these stingless drones may spoil the forced produce of your toil. Have ye leisure, comfort, calm, shelter, food, love's gentle bond? Or what is it ye buy so dear with your pain and with your fear? The seed ye sow, another reaps. The wealth ye find, another keeps. The robes ye weave, another wears. The arms ye forge, another bears. Sow seed, but let no tyrant reap. Find wealth, let no impostor keep. Weave robes, let not the idle wear. Forge arms, in your defense to bear. That is pretty explicit, pretty loaded rhetoric right there, and that is calling for armed insurrection against the wealthy. Make of it what you will. Shrink to your cellars, holes and cells. In halls ye deck, another dwells. Why shake the chains ye wrought? Ye see the steel ye tempered glance on ye. Oh, with plow and spade and hoe and loom, trace your grave and build your tomb, and weave your spindling sheet till fair England be your sepulchre. He's he's not being subtle here. He is calling for rebellion of the working classes, workers of the world unite. A couple of generations before Marx and Engels come along, he is very explicit and passionate in his outrage, in what he's calling for the redress of his grievances, saying, you know, you're doing all of this for everybody else. What do you get out of it? This is Marx and Engels, just half a century too soon, or sooner than they are. You can see the great passion coming through. You can see the simple black and white characterization of it. He's not making any nuance. Now, you don't usually get nuance in this sort of a thing. A song which is supposed to be inspiring, it's supposed to be fairly complicated or fairly uncomplicated in its organization. The criticism for that is that it is a cartoonish view of the politics, but sometimes that's what's needed. There are in life, occasionally in social life, good guys and bad guys, and he is standing there and identifying it. And if you just take it at that level, it has some real value. But the form, it's very easy to see what he's doing. Again, the simple words, the simple images, the simple short lines, the song that is supposed to be popular because you can remember it without reading it. One line after the other, simple rhyme scheme. One line after the other, very short and memorable. It's a very tight cartoon of socio-political situations in the economy of England at the time. And there's a place for that. I would argue, and I do argue, that it's not the greatest poetry, but you can see how the language is trying to articulate itself for a specific purpose. And for that, I would say Shelley is interesting to read because you can see exactly what he's doing at all times, and there's not a lot of nuance there. That's just me. Shelley has a lot of other voices, other venues, other modes that he takes part of. This is just more the political Shelley, which can get a little strident for my taste personally. But that's me. One of the other poems that he wrote that is very famous, and again, not necessarily a great, a fantastic expression of poetic art, but one that expresses an idea and an opinion about the worldly material life, political life, power, the expressions of authority, is the short sonnet Ozymandias. which is sort of fun, and it gets anthologized a lot, and it gives an interesting image for people to get a hold of Shelley's idea. I met a traveler from an ancient land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." It's an image of the hubris of a vast authority, a great and powerful king whose kingdom has fallen, whose legacy is now just a desolate landscape of nothing. The power of the image of this monument to great and kingly might has come to nothing. Is he saying that the poem is more significant? The words are more significant? I don't know. Than the power, than the authority itself? I don't know. The words themselves, the only words that he references in there besides his own are the words of the inscription. You know, I am Ozymandias. And those are ironic because everything else has come to waste. It's a clear statement about the passing, ephemeral nature of political power, of authority, how the kings may think they are almighty, but history will prove them wrong. The history he sees is a history of people and culture, and these things just keep going and wash away all of these other, supposed great leaders who become footnotes and barely footnotes to history. It's a somewhat fatalistic but ultimately optimistic view of history itself. The idea that tyrants may get you down from time to time, but history has a way of dealing with them. And if you're just patient, maybe things will turn out okay. The problem with most of Shelley's other work is that he doesn't show an awful lot of patience, and he's calling for immediate action, sometimes violent action. It is not a just wait and see attitude that he's expressing most of the time, but here he's using poetry to suggest that, well, King George, you're going to pass away, just like across the English Channel, Louis XVI, gone. They may seem almighty for the time that they're here. They may seem really imposing, impressive, frightening, inspiring, whatever, but they'll fade away. History does that. Authority is temporal. Authority is fleeting. And what is good about Shelley is his perspective on that and his willingness or his encouragement to everybody, even the common man, to say, okay, you're part of history. So that means authority is ultimately with you. Don't worry so much about everybody else. You are more powerful. And he tries to use his poetry to inspire people to understand that power, to empower themselves and stand up for their rights and stand up against authority when it is encroaching upon their rights in the great English tradition of personal liberty. The voice is ultimately a political voice in these poems, but it is inspiring on that romantic sense that it is trying to attach people to a sense of liberty, a sense of their own ideal nature, to stand up against these uh, bulwarks of established civilization that we call authority. And where does the real power lie? He's saying it lies with the people. He's saying it lies with ordinary human beings, recognizing the dignity of their simple humanity and empowering that in the face of or against that authority. There's a place for that in the world. There's a place for that. There's a place for that within art, and Shelley articulates that quite well. And you got to give him credit for that. A lot. He has much better poetry than the political stuff. He has worse poetry than the political stuff. He wrote a lot, but give him credit for what he accomplishes with poetry, for seeing that poetry as a vehicle of inspiration in the high romantic mode. Poetry can change the world.